We continue now at the top of Daf Pei Gimel and Beis in Meseches Gitin. This is Gittin Daf 83b. The Gemara is discussing the various arguments of the Tanoim against Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. Again, Rabbi Eliezer's opinion is, if a husband says to his wife, Harei mutaris l'chol adam chutz mi ploni, Rabbi Eliezer says that is an effective divorce. And now the Gemara is in the middle of Rabbi Akiva's second response to Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Akiva's second response to Rabbi Eliezer is, what happens in a situation where the person, the chutz mi ploni, that individual who she's still prohibited to, is a Kohen, and then it turns out that the husband dies. So then Rabbi Akiva said, it turns out that she's a widow as far as the Kohen is concerned, but she's a divorcee as far as everyone else. And that sad, the fact that she's a divorcee to everybody else, that's enough to prohibit her to the Kohen. And therefore the fact that she's an Eshes Ish, Lagabi the Kohen, should also prohibit her to everybody else. That was Rabbi Akiva's argument. And the Gemara now is in the middle of clarifying, according to Rabbi Akiva, it must be we're talking about chutz. It must be Rabbi Eliezer is talking about a case where he says you're mutter to everyone with the exception of the Kohen. It can't be on the condition that you don't marry the Kohen. And the Gemara explains as follows, because if it was a condition, Hare Grusha Etzlo Biznus, she's not simply a widow to the Kohen, she's also a divorcee to the Kohen, as far as Nus is concerned, because as we explained, when you say Almanas, when the husband says to the wife, on condition you don't marry so-and-so, the condition is just regarding marriage, it's not about Znus. The divorce actually does take effect in terms of Znus, so Ela Bechutz. So the Gemara says, so in the second argument of Rabbi Akiva, it seems that he understands Rabbi Eliezer is talking about chutz. But the Gemara now continues that Rabbi Akiva effectively made two arguments against Rabbi Eliezer. In one argument, he assumes that Rabbi Eliezer is talking about Almanas, and now in the second argument, he's assuming that Rabbi Eliezer is talking about chutz. And so the Gemara asks Rabbi Akiva, I chutz v'relei losiv chutz. Rabbi Akiva, if he holds Rabbi Eliezer is talking about chutz, he should ask questions from chutz. V'almanas v'relei losiv almanas. And if he holds that Rabbi Eliezer is talking about a case of Almanas, he should ask assuming Almanas. And the Gemara says, Rabbi Akiva shmiya lei di'iko di'amar chutz v'iko di'amar Almanas. Rabbi Akiva heard there were two versions of Rabbi Eliezer. Some say that it was a case of chutz, some say that it was a case of almanas. Man damar chutz hai pirchu, man damar almanas hai pirchu. If you say chutz, here's the refutation. If you say almanas, here's the refutation. And the Gemara continues, umay pirchu. Now, what's the refutation against Rabbi Akiva's second argument? And the Gemara says to that, inema iser kahuna shani, because if you're gonna say that argument, you can always say that kahuna is different. The whole kal v'chomer of Rabbi Akiva is based on kahuna. That the fact that the tzad of gerushin is enough to prohibit her to the Kohen, so too the fact that she has an Eshes Ish, Lagavi the Kohen, is enough to prohibit her to everybody else. But maybe Kahuna is different. But the Gemara says, Rabbi Eliezer nami meiser Kahuna kamaisile. One of the sources we brought for Rabbi Eliezer to the idea that if you do a divorce in this fashion, that it's effective, actually comes from the Psukim by Kahuna, because it's talking about the fact that even if you have Reach Haged, even if you have a little bit of a divorce, that's enough to prohibit Kahuna, and that's how Rabbi Eliezer understood that even if it's a divorce that's not a full divorce, it's still considered a divorce. But to that, the Gemara says, Rava is the one that said that there is a refutation to every one of the arguments, and so therefore Rava, who said that, meaning that Rava, who would say that there's a refutation to Rabbi Akiva's second argument, that refutation is dependent on the fact that Rabbi Eliezer doesn't learn from Kahuna, and that's exactly what Rava will say. Rava will follow Rabbi Yanai Mishum Zaken Echad, which was a different source that Rabbi Eliezer had, not the source from Kahuna, and so therefore that can be your refutation. You can refute Rabbi Akiva's argument by saying Isser Kahuna is Shani, and Rabbi Eliezer never learned his halacha from the Isser of Kahuna. And Rashi explains, Umay Pircha, so what is the refutation of the second argument of Rabbi Akiva? Ikal Mifrach Apirche de Rabbi Akiva Basrai. So what refutation can we have on Rabbi Akiva's argument? Tekama Rava Le'elu Lekulu Islu Pircha, because again, Rava said before that there are arguments against all the Tanoim except for Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah's argument. Inema Isra Kahuna Shani. If the argument against Rabbi Akiva is that you're bringing a proof from Kahuna, and Kahuna is different, however, Riva and Akosa mitzvahs Yiseiros, like we said earlier, because there's many mitzvahs that apply to Kohanim that don't apply to others. Rabbi Eliezer damar mutaris l'chol adam chutz mimenu. But even Rabbi Eliezer, who said the divorce is effective and she's mutter to everyone except for the individual who is specified, meiser kahuna yolevla, that entire halacha was learned from Kahuna. Migrusha meisha levada shapasal lakuna. Again, it was because we learned that as long as she's divorced, even just from her husband, that's enough to disqualify from Kahuna. Meyasam yalfa le'el, that we learned from there earlier. To me, the pasal lakuna have a Gitin, from the fact that she's disqualified from the Kahuna shows that it's a get. The alfagav the shire, even though a person was left off. The yolef mina kula v'lo amrin isser kuna shani. We learned out from there that the divorce is effective, and we don't say isser kuna is different. So kol shagain the matzi lemifrach ali bein neilif me isser kuna lechumra. So certainly we can say the other direction, that we should learn according to Rabbi Eliezer lechumra from the isser kuna. V'neima, we should say the other direction. Kiyechi the tzadge rusha posel lekuna. If the fact that she had some element of being a divorcee is enough to disqualify her from kahuna im yomas, if the person dies, yehitzadi shusa posel l'chaladim. The fact that she has some tzad of eshasish should passel her to everybody. If you're already learning from kahuna, you could certainly learn in the other direction. Rabbi Akiva's argument seems to be a good argument, and the Gemara says no. Rava Damar Le'el Kulu Islu Pircha. Rava, who said earlier that every single Tana except for Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah could be refuted, K'Rabbi Mishum Zoken Echad Masni Lo. He understands that Rabbi Eliezer learns the source in the way that Rabbi Yanai said in the name of a particular elder. Damar Le'el, he said earlier, Tam de Rabbi Eliezer mi v'haisol yishacher. He learned from a different pasuk of v'haisol yishacher v'lo yolef me Yisurei Kahuna. He didn't learn from Yisurei Kahuna. Hilkach parchinu Rabbi Akiva Isser Kahuna Shani. Therefore, the question on Rabbi Akiva would be that Isser Kahuna is different. V'lo tikshi Rabbi Eliezer, and therefore you don't really have, Rabbi Akiva doesn't really have a strong question on Rabbi Eliezer. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. Samar lahen Rabbi Yoshua. Rabbi Yoshua said to these Tanoim who made arguments against Rabbi Eliezer, Ein meshivin eswari la'achar misa. You can't respond to the lion after his death. And the Gemara says, Lameimer de Rabbi Yoshua kivase svirle. Does that mean to say that Rabbi Yoshua holds like Rabbi Eliezer? Va'iu nami mifrach kaparach. But he himself also asked questions against Rabbi Eliezer. And the Gemara says, Hachi kamar lahu. This is what he was saying to them. Here's what Rabbi Yoshua was saying to the other Tanoim. Ladidi nami isli pircha. I also have a refutation. I also have a question against Rabbi Eliezer. Mihu, nevertheless, bein ladidi, bein ladidchu, whether for me or for you, ein meshiven aswari lachar mi. So we don't respond to the lion after his death. And the Gemara says, Umay pircha de Rabbi Yoshua, and what was the refutation of Rabbi Yoshua against Rabbi Eliezer? The Tanya, as we learned in a Bryce, so Amar Rabbi Yoshua says, Makesh kodmei havoya sheniya, lekodmei havoya rishona. We compare the state of the woman before her second marriage to her state before the first marriage. Makodmei havoya rishona de lo agida bina shachrina. Just like before a woman gets married for the first time, she's not bound to any man. Af kodmei havoya sheniya, so too before she gets married a second time, meaning after she's received a divorce. The divorce is only good to lo agida bina shachrina, if she's not tied to any other man. And that's why Rabbi Yoshua argues to Rabbi Eliezer, it has to be hareat muteres l'chol adam. It can't be hareat muteres l'chol adam chutz mi ploni. And the Gemara continues, Gufa, returning to what we said above, Moder Rabbi Eliezer b'megarish ishto. Rabbi Eliezer admits if a person divorces his wife, Yamarlan, he says to her, Hareat muteres l'chol adam chutz mi ploni. You're mutter to everyone except for so-and-so. V'holcha v'nisas la'echon min ashuk. And then she goes and gets married to somebody. She has a second marriage. V'nisarm v'lo niskarsh, and she's widowed or divorced. Shemuteres l'zeh shenesra olav. She then becomes mutter to the person that she was previously prohibited, meaning to say that second marriage, it undoes that exception, and she's now permitted to that individual as well. And the Gemara continues, Heishiv Rabbi Shimon bar Elazar teshuva ledivrei Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Shimon bar Elazar, he responds to the words of Rabbi Eliezer here, and he says, Heichon matzinu, how can we find shezeh oser v'zeh matir, that this one prohibits, meaning after her first marriage, when she received the divorce, there was a prohibition. That marriage created a prohibition with the individual who was the exception, and now the second husband, that creates that it's permitted. Does that make any sense? But the Gemara says, V'lo, but we don't find such a thing. V'arei Yavama, we find that by a Yavama. The Baal Oser v'Yavam Mater, we find that the Baal is the one, the husband is the one that creates the prohibition, and the Yavam is the one that's able to create the heter. You can have Chalitza, that allows her. And the Gemara says, no, Hasam Yavam hu ka'asarla. There really the prohibition is not coming from the husband. It's coming from the Yavam. The Imi Baal Hasharya v'kaima, because as far as the husband is concerned, she's actually permitted. And the Gemara continues, we do find another exception, Harei Nedarim, but what about by Nedarim? The Noder Oser v'Chacham Mater, we find that the person who made the neder creates the prohibition, but the Chacham can undo it. And to that the Gemara says, Ha'amar Rav Yochanan, but Rav Yochanan says, Ein Chacham Mater Klum Ela B'charata. The only way the Chacham is able to undo it is if there's some kind of regret, so it really is coming from the Noder, from the one who made the neder in the first place. But the Gemara says, Harei Hafaras Habal, but what about the annulment of a husband? The Isha Noderis, so Baal Mefer over there, the wife is the one that makes the neder, and the husband annuls. It's not coming from the wife at all. And the Gemara says to that, Hasam K'der Rav Pinchas Mishmei de Rava. There it follows what Rav Pinchas said in the name of Rava. T'yamar Rav Pinchas Mishmei de Rava, because Rav Pinchas said in the name of Rava, Kol HaNoderes, when a wife makes a neder, Al Das Bala Hi Noderes, she's doing it with the understanding, on the understanding of her husband, and that's why the husband is able to annul. It really is essentially coming through her. And the Gemara continues, we said above, Nana Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah, V'yamar Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah, he responded as follows, krisus, when it comes to a divorce, it has to be a krisus, it has to be a full separation, Dover HaKores Beino Leveino, it has to be a full separation between him and her, Halamad Shein Zeh krisus. So we see from this that it's not a krisus if it's not going to separate completely, if there's an exception, if she's only mutter to everyone except for so-and-so, that's not considered krisus. And the Gemara says, "V'Rabbanan hay krisus ma'avdile." Now, what are the Rabbanan? What do they do with krisus? They have to respond to Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah. Why don't they use this argument? And the Gemara says, "Mi boilu lechidatanya." They use the krisus for something else, for the following brisa. Hareze gitech al menas shelo tishti yayin. If he says to her, "This is your get on condition that you don't drink wine," al menas shelo telchi leveis avich liolam, on condition that you don't go to your father's house forever. Meaning to say, if the condition is something that's going to last forever, so she's effectively bound to him forever. Ein zeh krisus, that's not called krisus. Shloshim yom, but if the condition is just 30 days, harei zeh krisus, that is called krisus. So the Rabbanan already use krisus for something else. That's why they don't respond with the same response as Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah. V'idach, and the other one, meaning Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah, mikares krisus nafka, he can learn two things from krisus, because it could have said it as kares, and instead it changes it to krisus. So you actually learn two things from that pasuk. V'idach, and the other ones respond, kares krisus lo darshi. They don't darshan the fact that it could have said kares, and instead it said krisus, that they don't make as a drasha. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rava says, Hareze gitech al menas shelo tishti yayin kol yimei chaya. If the husband says to his wife, this is your get on condition you don't drink wine all of my life, ein zeh krisus, it's not considered a proper severance, it's not a proper divorce. Kol yimei chaya ploni, but if he says you can't drink wine all the days of so-and-so's life, hareze krisus, that is considered a separation. The Gemara says, Ma'ishna chaya ploni, the dilma mois, u'mekayim alei l'tanoi. What's the difference, the life of so-and-so? So there, that so-and-so might die, she'll fulfill the tanai. It's possible to fulfill the tanai and then continue to go on. When it comes to his life also, maybe he's going to die and she'll have fulfilled the tanai. And so the Gemara says, you're right. Ela Ema rather say as follows. If he says that you can't drink wine your entire life, that's not called krisus, because now she's bound to him for the rest of her life. But if it's all the days of my life, of chaye ploni, or the life of so-and-so, harei krisus, that is considered to be krisus. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. Boy minei Rava me Rav Nachman. Rava asks Rav Nachman the following question: Hayom iat ishti ulamachar at ishti ma'u. If he says to her today, you're not my wife, but tomorrow you are going to be my wife, what is the halach in such a case? Rashi says, Hayom iat ishti nasan lo get. The case is as follows: husband gives her a get, v'yamar lo, and he says to her, Hayom levado yuhu gerishin. Only today it's going to be a divorce. Ulamachar lo yuhu gerishin. Tomorrow it's no longer going to be a divorce. The shire begita, he's essentially leaving something off the gerishin. Mahu, what's the halacha in that case? And the Gemara says, Tiboy l'Rebbe Eliezer, Tiboy l'Rabbanan. This is a question according to Rebbe Eliezer. Again, that's the Rebbe Eliezer who says that if he gives her a divorce with the exception of so-and-so, that is a good divorce. And it's also a question according to the Rabbanan who say that that's not a good divorce. This would be a question according to them as well. Tiboy l'Rebbe Eliezer, the Gemara says it's a question according to Rebbe Eliezer. Adkan lo kam Rebbe Eliezer hasam. Rebbe Eliezer only said it over there. Ela delaman, the kashari liolam, because it leads to the man that she's permitted forever. Aval hachalo, but over here that's not the case. Over here it's only today, it's not tomorrow. Maybe that would not be good according to Rebbe Eliezer. Odilmar, maybe loshna, maybe it doesn't make a difference. Tiboy l'Rabbanan, it's also a question according to the Rabbanan. Adkan lo ka'amri Rabbanan hasam ela de lo paska mine lagamri. The Rabbanan only said it over there because she's never been completely separated from him. There's still an ashes ish factor with regards to whoever the exception was. Aval hacha, but over here, kevan de paska. At this point in time, she's completely separated. And the Gemara says, Basar the boy hader pashta, after they asked the question. After he asked the question, he answered the question. And Rashi says, Kevan de paska mine hayom lagamri etzel kol adam. You can ask the question according to the Rabbanan, because over here, she was separated completely. For today, she's completely separated. Paschal l'chol adam liolam. And so therefore, Rashi says, what it means to say is, when we're saying according to the Rabbanan, that it's no good when there's an exception, when a person is an exception, she's prohibited to one man, that's because it's lo paska mine lagamri. But over here, kevan de paska, Rashi understands that to mean, once she's separated today, and she's permitted to everyone today, so paschal l'chol adam liolam, she's permitted to everyone forever. V'shuv eina ishto, and she's no longer going to be his wife. Unless he goes and does Kiddushin again, Hilkach ein Tanai zeh klum. In other words, the point of the Gemara is that it could be according to the Rabbanan, this Tanai is nothing, and we say it's a totally good divorce. We will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Pei Dalid Amud Aleph.